Hi, this is Bruce Lipton, and you're listening to Green Planet FM.
Kia ora, greetings, and welcome to Green Planet FM 104.6. I'm Tim Lynch, and I trust that you are doing well. I invite you to stay with me over the next hour as we discuss and find ways to take care of our unique and magnificent green planet Earth.
So important. A friend of mine, Anita Morjani, she wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. She had cancer, I forgot, it was 10 years with an oncologist, 10 years of being treated by an oncologist for her cancer, or whatever number of years. And it was her oncologist view, she was in her last week of life because her system shut down. She was so emaciated that the lumps of cancer were sticking out through her skin. She was on machines, and then she went into a coma. So the doctor called the family and said, listen, Anita's in a coma, and that's the last stage of my cancer patients before they die. Anita had an out-of-body experience, a spiritual connection with her father where the issues of her life were created, resolved that psychologically during this out-of-body experience, and resolved that stress, which was a belief, and was like most people have those out-of-body experiences, like, well, you have a choice. You can go back in your body or you can stay here, where she was like, oh, my God, this is so great out here. But she saw her husband, Danny, holding on to her hand while she was in a coma, and she thought, if I die, he's going to get sick. So she said, I'm going to go back. She got back, and guess what? The moment she came out of the coma, she didn't need the machines anymore. She was free of life support system. Within 2 weeks, the cancer had disappeared, and within 4 weeks, the doctors, with every test possible, were saying there's a cancer in there somewhere. They've studied it for all these years. They couldn't find it, and she told them there is no cancer in my body. And she has now been talking, lecturing. She wrote that book, and she's the most wonderful person, and she's my example of the poster child of biology of belief.
I must read that.
In the studio this morning, I have Bruce Lipton and David Holden. Bruce comes from the United States, where he has spent a lot of his time looking at the cellular structure. He's a quantum biologist, as he is now looking at being able to bridge the gap between science and spirit. And I have also David Holden. David is a natural medicine and natural therapies practitioner. He's been close on 30 years in this country working with the natural ways to be able to bring good health to our being. And as this is all part of the International Holistic Cancer Symposium that's going to be here in Auckland on the 24th and 25th of March, you've gathered here this morning to be able to share some of the leading edge means of being able to cure cancer, but also to look at how is it we've become a cancerous society. It's increasing hugely. 38% of the human population could end up with cancer on the latest statistics. So we need to heal the human race, and we also realize that we are energy fields in a greater universal energy field. This is important because we've got to actually lift ourselves out of a cellular world into a higher frequency of existence. So, David, thank you. Would you like to share with the audience what's going to happen and what you want to be able to achieve?
Sure. This is the third event of this type we put on in Auckland over 8 years, and Bruce has been the keynote speaker at each one. And we're so privileged to have Bruce here with a man of such incredible knowledge and wisdom to share in this particular area around holistic cancer. And, you know, the statistics are appalling. As you said before, the WHO says that by 2020, 1 in 2 people in the West will die of cancer. Not with it, of it. That's pretty serious. And so what we're wanting to do is to bridge that, lower those numbers, get more information out to the people that need it to show that they can control their own destiny, that we have other options other than the standard burn, cut and poison or chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery approach of orthodox medicine. Not to say that doesn't have a place. It does, but it's a very small place. Chemotherapy is overused like antibiotics and steroids by medicine because they're not aware of other options around nutrition, mind-body medicine, meditation, mindfulness, lifestyle medicine, which Ian Gawler has really promoted a lot over the years. And Ian was a keynote speaker at 2 of our previous conferences. He's now retired. And so what I've done is I've picked some of the best brains in the States, Australia, and New Zealand, brought them all together over a weekend to talk about what we can do as human beings on this planet to change the direction of cancer and its history in the world. And because still the vast majority of the medical institutions, particularly in New Zealand and Australia, less so in the States and Europe, are not teaching their doctors about nutrition. They're not teaching their doctors about epigenetics. They're not teaching their doctors about the mind-body connection in health. And this is of a concern because Bruce's work particularly talks about the impact of that and how we can effectively change genetic expression. And so you look at one of the notables, Dr. Ralph Moss, PhD, did a meta-analysis. That's a study of all the main research papers done on chemotherapy and cancer to work out how successful is cancer. Okay, what's the percentages? Well, have a guess what the percentage of success just using chemotherapy is across the board with all types of cancer. Have a guess what the number is.
I don't know, 7%?
Go down.
Yeah.
It's appalling. It's 2.1% in the United States and 2.3% in Australia. That's over a 5-year analysis done in the 90s. And the figures haven't changed that much. There's a few notables, areas where research has improved with the new immunotherapy drugs like Keytruda for melanoma. It's making a massive difference. I personally have 6 patients that would be underground pushing up daisies now if it wasn't for Keytruda. But the problem is chemotherapy is devastating the immune system and it's being totally overused and we've got to stop doing it. And that's why I pulled together this range of speakers. This is the biggest event we've ever done at the AUT. We're expecting 350 to 400 delegates, health practitioners. Unfortunately, the ones that need to be there probably won't be. Medical oncologists, medical radiologists. However, my job after the event is to distribute the information to those people, put it in front of them, then they have a choice to start to read and understand it or not. All we can do is take the horse to water. They're the ones that have to drink. So we have some very, very notable speakers. Bruce, of course, who you're going to hear about very shortly, who's the keynote speaker. We also have Dr. Jack Tips, who's a very well-known naturopathic physician, homeopath, and nutritionalist from Austin, Texas. Personal friend of mine. I've brought to New Zealand 3 times before. He's coming, flying in especially for the event, and he has some very interesting new information on viruses and cancer, which he wants to share. We also have Dr. Greg Fredericks, who's written this wonderful document, an integrative oncology guide to cancer. And he's doing a study and has written a book on all the suppressed cancer cures throughout history, the doctors behind it, why it was suppressed, the science behind their remedies and how they work, and the science showing that they do actually work. And doctors need to be aware of these suppressed cures. We've also got Glenn Gillard, a naturopath friend of mine I've known for 30 years in Australia, who's known as the naturopath gadget man. And he's using induction coils, Rife frequencies, a whole range of electronics to help restore immune competence with patients that have weakened immune system after conventional therapies or just because their mind-body connection isn't working properly. And he helps restore that consciousness with them. We also have Catherine Smith, who's going to be talking about the effect of electromagnetic fields, all these electronics that surround us every day, how they're impacting particularly brain cancers.
I agree.
And what we can do to protect ourselves against those EMFs because it's getting worse, not better. I mean, how many devices do you have at home now compared to what you had 10 years ago? Most of us have got a lot more devices. We're saturated and swimming and bathing in EMF that was zero 200 years ago.
Wait until 5G comes out.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a concern. And then we've got John Eisen, who's going to share his personal story with cancer and how he reversed it using natural medicine, which will be very, very interesting. I've also, in between some of the speakers, I've selected 4 cancer patients of mine who survived cancer, and they're going to share their stories of what they did. We've also got Kim Knight, who's a mind-body practitioner, who's going to talk about the emotional intelligence behind breast cancer, particularly. Very emotional disease for women, and she's going to talk about that from a woman's perspective, which will be fascinating. We've got Professor Bill Watson, who's going to be talking about oxygen debt and the Nagalase enzyme and GCMAF and a whole range of other aspects of cancer treatments, all science-based. And there are other speakers as well. It's a very, very detailed 2-day intensive for the practitioners that will be turning up. And you can find out more by going onto the website holisticcancersymposium.com. holisticcancersymposium.com.
And that's going to be on the 24th and 25th of March.
In Auckland at the AUT.
Very good. Now, you're going to introduce Bruce to get his particular insight.
Sure.
So I'll allow you.
Thank you. Well, I've had the pleasure of knowing this wonderful man for must be 7-8 years now, and Bruce and I have become good friends, and I'm fascinated in his take, and he's given me a little preview before this interview about the topic he's going to be talking on at this conference. Bruce has an astounding range of knowledge around epigenetics, the mind-body connection, and how science and spirit does dovetail. And he's going to take that to a whole new level with his talk. So I urge people to come and hear what Bruce has to say. So I'll let Bruce speak for himself.
Well, I want to thank you both for letting me be here and for this program, which I think is the most important understanding that's necessary for the public. And there's a simple reason, and that is I used to teach in the medical school, and I taught the conventional story how genes control life, genes turn on and off. And what I needed to tell you is that while I was teaching in the medical school, I was also doing research on stem cells. This is actually my 50th anniversary of my stem cell research, so it's not new stuff, but it was pioneering. It was pioneering because back at that time, as I said, I was teaching medical doctors about the fact that genes control life. And I said, but what does this mean to the public when you teach something like that? And I said, well, the first thing it means is this. Your life is not under your control. Your life is under the control of your heredity, what genes you inherited from other people. So we are given a belief that the genes that we inherit are like blueprints for the rest of our life. And therefore, whatever kinds of good genes, great, but whatever kinds of bad genes, oh my God, now we have like a walking time bomb that a gene is going to turn on or off and my whole life is going to go upside down. Well, I said, well, what is that relevant to all of us on this planet? And the relevance is this. If you understand that as a belief, then what you're saying is this. You are a victim of your heredity. That genes control you. You don't control the genes. You didn't pick the genes. You don't want the genes. You can't change the genes. And all of a sudden it says, oh, my God, my life is not under my control. I'm a victim. There's a couple of consequences that just that belief. And the first thing is this. You give up power. If I'm a victim, then I'm saying I have no power, and therefore that enhances your victimness. But then, and here's the other side, when you feel you have no power, then you will seek a rescuer. And you will pay that rescuer whatever dear dollars you have to give you your life back. And, of course, who steps into this void is the pharmaceutical industry that says, good, your body is a machine, you have nothing to do with it, but we make parts. And if you buy our parts, you can have a great machine. Well, this is all wrong. The entire belief system is entirely wrong, as I found out doing my stem cell research. And what the stem cell research revolved around is that if I put one stem cell, which is an embryonic cell, that's just another name for it, one cell in a petri dish and it divides every 10 hours. First is 1, then 2, 4, 8, 16, doubling. A week later, I've got 30,000 cells in the petri plate. The most important point about it is that they're all genetically identical because they came from the same primal one cell. And then I say, okay, so I split the 30,000 cells into 3 petri dishes. So I have 3 dishes, genetically identical cells in all of them. And then when you grow cells in a laboratory, you grow them in something called culture medium. And you go, okay, what's that? And I go, it's the equivalent of blood. So if I want to grow human cells, I look at the composition of human blood and synthesize a version of that called culture medium. I grow mouse cells, I look at mouse blood composition, and likewise create it. So here's the point. I create the culture medium, which is the equivalent of blood, but I can change the chemistry. So I make 3 different versions of culture medium, almost identical, but slightly different chemistry. And I feed the dishes in dish A, environment A, culture medium A, the cells form muscle. In a second dish with a slightly different environment, a different culture medium B, the cells form bone. And in a third dish, again with a different composition of culture medium, the cells form fat cells. And I was there looking at this and going, oh my God, the genes don't control the expression of the cell because they all have the same genes. That the control of the cell was from the environment. The cell was adapting or adjusting its biology to the environment. It was like, oh my gosh, here I am teaching medical students genes turn on and off, and it turns out that is a false statement. Genes have no activity, and think about it, because every one of us thinks that genes are controlling us, and I go, a gene is the equivalent of a blueprint, period. I say you go into an architect's office, she's working on a blueprint, and you ask her, is your blueprint on or off? And she'll look at you and go, what are you, crazy? It's a blueprint. There's no on and off. And I go, precisely, exactly. This is the most important point. Your genes are blueprints, and as blueprints cannot turn themselves on and off. They're just blueprints. The more important question is then who reads the blueprints? Who pulls up the blueprints? Who can change the blueprints? And the answer is our nervous system is the primary control. And you say, how did that connection? And I go, very simply this. It was the chemical composition of the culture medium that determined the fate of the cells. So my next question, of course, is then what controls the chemical composition of the culture medium, the blood? I say, oh, your blood is controlled by your nervous system, the composition. The nervous system releases hormones and neurochemicals to regulate up and down the functions. And so the chemistry coming from the brain goes into the blood. The blood is the culture medium. And inside, under our skin, we have 50 trillion cells. So we're like a skin-covered petri dish. And inside, the culture medium is controlling the fate of the cells, just like it did in the plastic dish. And then I say, yeah, but it was the composition of the culture medium. And now finally we come to the most important understanding in the world is, okay, cells are responding to the chemistry in the culture medium. The chemistry in the culture medium is controlled by the nervous system. And then the most important question in the whole world comes down to, well, what chemicals should the brain put into the blood? And here comes the, oh my gosh, answer, and that is this. Whatever picture is being held in your mind, the picture is translated by the brain into chemistry. Most of us, when we were young, played with something called paint by numbers, where you start with an outline of a picture with black and white, and color numbers are put into the little spaces, and then there's a paint set where each color has a number, and you take that number, fill in the spots, and then you create, voila, this beautiful picture. Let's simplify it, and it goes like this. The system works like paint by numbers in reverse, meaning first you start with the picture in your head, and then the brain breaks it down into numbers, but those numbers represent neurochemicals and regulatory hormones. And I say, and then they're released into the blood, and then that goes and paints your cells to match the image that was in your mind. And all of a sudden, I say, oh my gosh, if you change your mind, you change your chemistry. I go, 100%. So, for example, if you're there right now and your eyes are closed and you open your eyes and you see someone you love, I say, well, what's happening in your chemistry? I go, oh, a picture of love releases some very specific chemistry totally associated with love, including dopamine for pleasure, and that's why you fall in love. You feel the pleasure. It's chemistry. It releases oxytocin. That's a chemical that bonds you to that love source to keep you in that high. And more importantly, when you're in love and you see a picture of love in your mind, your brain releases into the culture medium, the blood, growth hormone, which does what it does. And I say, well, what does that mean? I say, look, everyone sees someone in love and they go, oh, look how they glow. See how healthy they are. Like, it's not an accident. This is a result of direct chemistry from the mind being translated by the brain, put into the culture medium, blood, and adjusting the genetics and behavior of the cells. This is a new science. When I started this 50 years ago, it wasn't even a science, but now it's called epigenetics. And you go, what does that mean? It sounds like genetics. I go, no, here. When I say genetic control, which is what almost everybody out there in the audience has learned, that means control by genes. That's where the belief comes from. The gene caused this, the gene caused that. The new science is called epigenetic. And so epigenetic control is a revolution, but it sounds the same. I go, no, here's the difference. Epi means above. So when you say epigenetic control, you're saying literally control above the genes. Oh my God, the control is not in the genes. It's coming from the vision in your mind. And I go, yeah, but if you ask somebody who's sick, you say, you got a picture of being sick in your mind? I go, well, there's where the problem comes from. There are two minds. and they are interdependent. There's the conscious mind connected to your personal identity, and through quantum physics, we now know connected to an energy field, which in other terms is defined exactly as spirit, energy field, but in quantum physics, field. And so we have this mind that's connected to the system, okay? And once we start to recognize this, then we start to recognize, wait, I am making a picture with my conscious mind. That's called the mind with wishes and desires. That's the mind that says, oh, I want to be healthy. I want to have a great life. I want to have great romance. I want a great job. That's wishes and desires, conscious mind. The second mind is the autopilot mind, and it's called subconscious. I go, what do you mean autopilot? I say, well, everything you have learned how to do, walking, talking, riding a bicycle, driving a car, mathematics, I don't care, whatever it is you learned, it becomes a program in the subconscious. And I said, well, why is this relevant? I said, well, if you were running your life with your conscious mind, then by definition, you would be sending chemistry into your body of pictures of success, health, happiness. And then I have to tell the sad news, and that is only 5% of our cognitive activity is coming from the conscious mind. I said, well, why so little? And the answer is this. Imagine your body as a vehicle and your conscious mind's behind the wheel driving. And I go, this is really cool. And I'm driving wherever the conscious mind wants to take me. Success, health, great. I go, this is really cool. But then I say, but what if the conscious mind does what it really can do, and that is think? You go, what do you mean? I say, well, thinking. I say, well, what happens when you're thinking? And I say, the first thing is this. By definition, when you're thinking, your direction of your conscious mind is focused inward. Like if I said, so what are you doing next week at this time? The answer isn't written on the floor, the walls, or anywhere. The answer is inside your head. So if you're going to think about the answer, then by definition, your conscious mind stops looking outside of where the vehicle is going, lets go of the wheel, goes inside to have thought. And while the conscious is not driving, the autopilot subconscious kicks in and drives with whatever program you got. Now, here's where the problem comes from. The training and the programming occurs during the first 7 years, and we get the programs by observing father, mother, family, and community and download their behavior. So here's the point. 5% of the day, conscious mind's controlling us and going exactly where our wishes and desires, aspirations want to go. 5%. But 95% of the day, science has recognized we're in thought, thinking about tomorrow, yesterday, last week, future, whatever. And I say, well, there's a problem. Because if you're in thought 95% of the day, then your life is not being controlled by your wishes and desires. Your life is controlled by your program that you got in the first 7 years. And I go, why is this relevant? Because the programs came from other people. They don't answer your wishes and your desires. You're just replaying other people's behavior. And 70% of those behaviors are disempowering, self-sabotaging, and limiting beliefs. Who do you think you are? You don't deserve that. These are the things we heard.
Not good enough.
Not good enough. You can do better. And these are the programs that happen in the first 7 years. So if I say, if all of a sudden I switch from I'm looking for happiness and joy and health, and I switch and I'm now thinking and my subconscious kicks in, what's it saying? You're not good enough. You don't deserve this. Who do you think you are? And all of a sudden I go, oh my God, that behavior is going to sabotage me. Now I need to just clear this up so that people really get it. Because you say, well, obviously I'd be aware if I was playing programs that were sabotaging me. And I go, not really. And here's why. The focus of the conscious mind is on the inside, and so it doesn't observe what you're doing on the outside. And I've given this story, and Tim, I've been on your show a couple of times. Same story. Why? Because there's no better story to explain this than the following. You have a friend, you know your friend's behavior very, very well, and you happen to know your friend's parent. And one day you see your friend has this same behavior as their parent, and this excites you, and you want to tell your friend, so you go, hey, Bill, you're just like your dad. Back away from Bill. Bill is immediately going to go ballistic. How can you compare me to my dad? I'm nothing like my dad. Most everyone laughs because it's like, oh, yeah, I've seen that around. And I go, what does it represent? Everybody else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. The only one who doesn't see it is Bill.
Yeah.
I go, well, okay, everybody hold on wherever you are. Hold on. We are all Bill. Every one of us is doing the exact same thing as Bill. When we are thinking, we are defaulting to subconscious. The subconscious has programs that are 70% disempowering and sabotaging. But while we're playing those programs, we are the only ones that don't see it. So if you're sabotaging yourself, all you see is the result. My God, it didn't work. And the conscious mind's now totally confused because I wanted to succeed and it didn't work. And it's
like a veil comes down and you're unaware of it.
You're unaware. But here's the joke part, because some people catch it as they're just coming out of thinking. They're catching the tail end of the automatic behavior. And at that moment in chagrin, it's like, oh my God, I was just acting like my dad. Oh no, my God, I was acting just like my mom. You just caught the tail end. The fact was, you were playing that program the entire time. And I want people to understand, is this a new understanding of science? I go, no, listen, the Jesuits for 400 years have acknowledged what science has just recognized. And that is this: the Jesuits said, give me a child until it's 7 and I will show you the man. What they knew was whatever programming we got before 7, 95% of that person's life is going to be exactly that program, so you can predict what the outcome is going to be. And where this applies to cancer, here's a great truth. They followed the fate of children adopted into families where cancer was running in the family. And it turns out the adopted child, whether it was an infant when it was brought in, the adopted infant will have the same probability of getting the family cancer as any of the natural siblings. But then you have to step back and go, wait, the child came from totally different genetics.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's like, well, then how did it follow in the lineage? And the answer, as we're finding out right now, number one, this very important point, less than 1% of disease is due to genetics. That's a fact of science. And I go, holy gosh, why is that important? Well, I said, well, then where the 90% of disease coming from if it isn't from genetics? And the answer is lifestyle and environment and belief. And I go, wow, you know what's so important? In the old story of genetics, you were a victim. Why? The genes control you. You don't control the genes. The new story of epigenetics turns that upside down and says, wait a minute. The genes are controlled by your environment, your perception, and your lifestyle. I go, oh, I can change any of those. And all of a sudden it's like, well, if you can change those, then you can change your life genetically. And it turns out in 8 hours of changing a belief, 8 hours of a meditation, genes can change in 8 hours.
Wow.
And the relevance about that is another one, just so people understand. Identical twins, when they're born, virtually have the same genetics. Identical genetics. But if you read the gene readout, which is a gene chip, and you read the readout, you read it and they're first born, they're almost identical gene readout. But you come back and read it a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later. Every year of life, the genetic readout diverges. And it changes. They started out identical. And you say, how far can it diverge? One identical twin can have a healthy, happy life their entire 90 plus 100 years, and the other one could die of cancer at 40. I say, yeah, but they came with the same exact identical genetics. And I go, because it's not the genes, it's how we exercise or express the genes. And why this conference becomes so critical is our belief system has been skewed by the belief of victim, when in fact we are masters, but no one taught us. And if you have no knowledge, you have no power. And we're in an era of upending what was conventional knowledge. And there's new quantum physics, which first of all expresses the role of invisible energy in shaping all of this. And epigenetics, which recognizes you are in absolute control of your genetics and of your life. And that takes us from victim to master. But knowledge is power. And here's the corollary that it's more important. A lack of knowledge is a lack of power. We have been systematically deprived of empowering knowledge, especially with the pursuit of the pharmaceutical industry, which only gets power by having power over you. And if you have power over the system, you won't need pharmaceutical drugs, and then they know that. And the information I've been talking about, which is absolute solid science from foundation up, is very difficult to see in a medical school. because the curriculum is overseen in a large part by the money of the pharmaceutical industry. And so the idea of energy healing, which has been known scientifically since 1930, there are papers in all mainstream journals that started in 1930. And where are they today? Right. I have all publications about how electromagnetic fields of very precise frequencies can turn on and off DNA synthesis, which makes cells divide or not. Can turn off on and off differentiation. It takes an embryonic cell. And in other words, every function of the cell has been recognized to be controlled by electromagnetic fields. The primary electromagnetic fields are derived from your own nervous system. That's how it works. Your nervous system takes your consciousness and turns it into electromagnetic fields, which in turn are controlling genetics and behavior. And this becomes so critical for the audience that needs to show up at this conference, because without this knowledge, you are disempowered.
Yes.
And that we're only a victim of a lack of knowledge. And this conference is profoundly important. It says, I think it's time for people to get their power back.
Yes.
And I don't want to knock the medical profession. I was a professor in a medical school. I was in University of Wisconsin, Stanford University School of Medicine, doing work, okay? So medicine, let me just clearly state this. Medicine does miracles with trauma. If I get in a car accident, I'm not calling on a naturopath to help me, or a chiropractor, or a massage therapist. I'm getting that medical surgeon.
Yes.
But, there's another fact. When it comes to non-trauma, cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, we now know that 90% or more of everything that I just mentioned, that list, is due to the consciousness and the lifestyle and the environment. And yet we, in the allopathic community, are still looking at it as a breakdown, and the cell is broken. It's stupid, and we're going to put some drugs in there and fix stupid
Newtonian
cells.
mechanics.
That's Newtonian mechanics. And it turns out that's the failure of the system. So medicine does miracles with trauma, but when it comes to causes of cancer and diabetes, Alzheimer's, and all these other things, they're absolutely failing tremendously. The more money they put in the system, the worse the health crisis is becoming. Yes. So it's not the idea that we don't make an effort, but you're putting the effort into trying to look at a broken cell when it turns out the cells aren't broken. They're just becoming a complement to the picture. It's the picture that needs readjusting, not the physical biology. But that's a knowledge. That's a consciousness. This is why this conference becomes important. You, as a conventional person in the audience, has been programmed with genes controlling your life, which then makes you, of course, that victim. And I'm trying to tell you the newest science, from epigenetics to quantum physics, reverses that entire thing and says less than 1% of diseases due to genetics.
It gives back our power and helps us control our own destiny, doesn't it? And this shows the importance of meditation and mindfulness in changing that reality in our subconscious.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a level of, I said, from the nervous system input. There's a level from the chemistry. When I make culture medium, here's a simple fact. I'm making the equivalent of blood in a laboratory. Let me give you a simple fact. I don't buy my ingredients at Kmart. I buy the best ingredients in the world to make culture medium, because if I just put one, less quality ingredient in, when I feed the cells, within minutes, I can see them respond.
Yeah.
And they're very unhappy. So I'm just saying, well, culture medium is equivalent of blood. And therefore I said, but you're making blood. And I said, and what chemical, nutritional elements are you making that blood with?
Or the building blocks.
The building blocks, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, well, nutrition becomes a major part of this as well.
Yeah.
So we have consciousness, we have nutrition, and these are issues that, David, I really believe that the people that you are bringing to this conference to present will be addressing these topics.
And isn't it sad, Bruce, because you've been a professor of medicine, you've taught at medical school, that doctors aren't taught anything about nutrition. I mean, they get 3 hours in 6 years of training on nutrition. 3 hours, and if they miss those lectures, they don't have to resit them. It's crazy, whereas a naturopath does a minimum of 2 years training in nutrition. If they get less than 70% in their finals, they have to redo the entire course.
Right. Well, again, this is... there is a whole power control over health.
Yeah.
It's an industry. And unfortunately, I was in that industry without knowing it. I was participating, and I didn't realize the nature of the industry.
Right.
And I'll give you an example.
I'm speaking with Bruce Lipton, PhD, a quantum biologist and an internationally recognized leader in bridging science and spirit. He is also a best-selling author of The Biology of Belief and Spontaneous Evolution. He is talking with New Zealand's David Holden, who has had 30 years in natural medicine, specializing in naturopathic oncology, neurology, and endocrinology, and they are going to be presenting at the International Holistic Cancer Symposium here in New Zealand on March 24th and 25th at Auckland University of Technology, AUT, and for more information, the website is holisticcancersymposium.com.
And I'll give you an example. If I'm, did they say Clark here instead of clerk? Clark. I'm a clerk at the bank.
Yeah.
Okay. You are saying, oh, good, look what I'm helping people in the community. They're putting money away. They're making safety and all that. So I am helping. The bank is helping people. And I say, go up about 4 floors in that building. And then that bank executive's office is like, how much money do we make today? They're not interested in you. They're interested in what the final line is. But that's a corporation. Yeah. And corporations, by law, that is the most important line.
What the shareholders' profits are. That's all
right. So if I have a health corporation and I'm not making a profit, I'm violating the government regulations. Okay, and then oh my God! Now you got me on this. I have to finish it now. I said, how does a health corporation make a profit? Oh, well, they charge more than the services are worth.
Of course.
And I go, but wait a minute. That means a person who's already down and out. Mm-hmm. You're kicking that person to squeeze more money out of them. Yeah. They already are suffering. 2/3 of the bankruptcies in the United States, which means you lose your house, you lose your savings and everything. 2/3 are because of medical bills.
Wow.
2/3 of all the bankruptcies.
That's appalling statistic, isn't it?
It is, because you get, they said today, how many Americans can afford to go to an emergency room for $1,000 bill, which we walk in the emergency room is $500 right there, okay? And they said more than 2/3 of the population cannot afford at this moment $1,000 for health care.
Wow.
And that is just to walk into the emergency room.
It's tragic.
So the reality is they're making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then I say, but why is it relevant? So let's simplify it. There's a common root to the word human, humane, humanity. The common root word is compassion. Mm-hmm. So then I step back and say, is the medical profession, which includes the hospitals and the schools and all that, are they compassionate entities? And I go, well, not that when you consider they're going to suck the blood out of you when you get sick. Then I said, well, then they're not compassionate. I go, absolutely, they don't care about, as long as you can pay the bill. I mean, you should see, you probably have seen some of the videos in the U.S. where a poor person gets into a hospital, and the hospital does its best to get them back on their feet so they can walk, and then take a patient carrying their drip bottle on a little rolling thing. Right. They put them in a taxi cab, and they pay the taxi driver, drop this person off in the middle of the bad part of town. And you see people get out of a cab in a hospital gown, walking down the street, pulling their little drip bottle with them. And the reason is why? They don't want that free patient in the hospital. They did enough. They said, okay, you can go out. And they even paid for the cab. Because it was cheaper than keeping them in the hospital. Yeah. So I'm looking at this profession. I'm going, it's not the doctors.
It's not the nurses.
It's not the doctors, especially not the nurses, because that's where more of the healing comes from anyway.
Exactly.
And so the simple reality is this: we're not condemning medical doctors. We're condemning medical corporations.
Yes. The system.
The system. The doctors are caught in the middle. They came into the system like, oh, I'm going to be a healer.
With all the best intentions to help humanity.
I was teaching their first semester, so I see them come in just busting with excitement. Yeah. I'm going to medical school. And then I'd see my same class 4 years later.
Wow.
And all they're saying, get me the hell out of this place. Get me out of here. They can't take any more. They're in debt. They're drowning in debt and all of this stuff. And then they get out, and guess what? They can't practice what they need to practice. They practice according to what is standard convention.
Yeah.
And I go, standard convention? What does that mean? I say, give them something. even if it's useless.
In a 15-minute consult.
In a 15-minute, and that's a long time. And I said, well, you know what? When was the medical profession actually helpful? And I go back to the days when they only had family physicians.
Right.
Because the family physician knew what the family was doing lifestyle. They knew the psychology. They saw the community, and they worked with an understanding. You are an expression of how you fit in this community. And they were working, and they were helping.
Yeah.
But the more we pulled away from the story, the more we pulled away from the personal life, all of a sudden it's like, what, are you a machine? It's just like you brought your Toyota in. It's got, oh, that's the year Toyota. Here's the part number, you know, boom, put the part in there. And it's like, where's the person?
Yeah.
And it's gone. And the healing has gone out the window.
Bruce, I like the Chinese system, the old Chinese system, where the village healer would be paid on a monthly basis by all the villagers to stay well. As soon as they got sick, they stopped paying the healer. They had a huge incentive to keep those people well. That is a good system.
Yeah,
they call
absolutely. They call them barefoot doctors too.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And they were totally involved in education, teaching the people how to eat right, how to live right, how to think right, how to exercise, Tai Chi, Qigong, eating herbs as part of their natural diet to help stave off disease and conditions that were rampant in that particular area. Smart medicine, very smart medicine.
Absolutely, and now is a return to smart medicine time. Because we've taken that mechanical, industrial medicine to this limit. I say, how effective are they? Disease is more rampant now than it was when they were working on it. So I really have to say, we knew, you know, there was a comedian, I remember, and he said, the older I get, the smarter my father becomes.
Yes.
And why is this relevant? Because there was a father of medicine, and yet we disregarded that father of medicine, and we became chemists, and we became genetic engineers and all that stuff. And we pushed that to this limit, to this moment of planetary health crisis. And now we look back and go, oh, my God, the original fathers of medicine, they already knew the answer.
Yes.
And we must go back and recognize we are part of an environment.
Yes.
And if we separate from that environment, it's at the cost of health. And this becomes important. And I'll close with one last thing, because to me it's so important. A friend of mine, Anita Moorjani, she wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. And she had cancer, I forgot, it was 10 years with an oncologist, 10 years of being treated by an oncologist for her cancer, or whatever number of years. And it was her oncologist view. She was in her last week of life because her system shut down. She was so emaciated that the lumps of cancer were sticking out through her skin. She was on machines, and then she went into a coma. So the doctor called the family and said, listen, Anita's in a coma, and that's the last stage of my cancer patients before they die. Anita had an out-of-body experience, a spiritual connection with her father where the issues of her life were created, resolved that psychologically during this out-of-body experience, and resolved that stress, which was a belief, and was like most people have those out-of-body experiences, like, well, you have a choice. You can go back in your body or you can stay here, where she was like, oh, my God, this is so great out here. But she saw her husband, Danny, holding on to her hand while she was in a coma, and she thought, if I die, he's going to get sick. So she said, I'm going to go back.
Right.
She got back, and guess what? The moment she came out of the coma, she didn't need the machines anymore. She was free of life support system.
Brilliant.
Within 2 weeks, the cancer had disappeared, and within 4 weeks, the doctors, with every test possible, were saying there's a cancer in there somewhere. They've studied it for all these years. They couldn't find it, and she told them there is no cancer in my body. And she has now been talking, lecturing. She wrote that book, and she's the most wonderful person, and she's my example of the poster child of biology of belief.
I must read that.
It's the most exciting story because it reveals she got down to the very edge of death. She was on her deathbed, full-out cancer.
Yeah.
And came back with a different belief, and the cancer radically disappeared.
Wow.
And this is not a misdiagnosis. There are years of oncology reports.
Right.
And it's like, that's how far can you go? And the answer was, to the point she was on support machines, unconscious.
In her last hours.
Just changed her belief.
Wow.
And woke up on the healing.
What's the name of the book and the author again?
Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. It was a classic best-selling book in the United States for a long time. And I really hope that people dealing with cancer look at this and say, why is this? It's like, look, you could go to the very last breath, essentially. And if you change your belief at that moment, it comes right back.
Wow. That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then that proves the point of the whole mind-body connection. And this is a big part of natural medicine and naturopathic oncology. And many of our speakers are talking just specifically about that subject at the symposium.
Yes, it's very interesting what you said, Bruce, because if we follow the information at Masaru Emoto, the Japanese professor, when he said he could take photographs of the thoughts of people directed at a glass of water that was then frozen as a crystal, and if they were a positive thought, they were all very profoundly beautiful crystals.
Love and gratitude, yeah.
That's right. And if they were negative and hateful, it was a very convoluted dark crystal. So there's another verification.
It's an energy field.
Yes.
And water is an energy, absorbs energy and alters its structure based on the energy available to it. And the energy is communicated from water molecule to water molecule, which is now understood there's a foundation for homeopathy.
Yes.
It says, I don't need the chemistry, I just need the energy of the chemistry.
Water has memory.
And water has once the energy is in the water, it will change the character of the water, as Emoto has shown.
That's proven. Yeah.
Well, that means that Aucklanders, which take 10% of their water out of the Waikato River, and it's got a catchment area of a huge area where all these chemicals from farms are going
leaching into the water.
So if they're coming through the water into people's mouths, and babies in particular. So we've got to have a look at this. And another thing that I want to really discuss shortly anyway is that babies and children brought into the world, if they're brought into a loving family and the family is conscious and the family have a good choice of vocabulary and vernacular, the kiddies will actually get a good program, for want of a better word. Whereas if children have been brought up today who have come from broken families and they're watching all the crap under the sun on TV and God knows what else, the children are getting a very convoluted and a horrible program.
A distorted picture of the world,
And so consequently, they're going to suffer more, and cancer can find that route in to actually destroy their lives. So we've got to be really, really mindful of how we bring children into the world and what thought patterns that we and love is the key.
I want to tell you that's the root of all of the problems. As I said, to the first 7 years, the subconscious is learning programs so that we can use those programs when we become conscious. The first 7 years, a child's not even in consciousness. Their brain activity is primarily when you put wires on a person's head, electroencephalograph, EEG. Their brain activity is below alpha, which is consciousness. It's theta, which is actually hypnosis. So the idea is the first programs put into a child aren't created by the child. They're copied from what's going on in the environment around them.
The parent.
So if the parent has a negative behavior, the child is just recording that and will have the exact same behavior. So that's how children end up being much like their parents. Like people like, the jokey part about it is like, a musician, famous musician has a child who becomes a great musician. And they go, it must be in the genes. And I go, no, it was never in the genes. It was the child grew up in an environment learning the music. As it breathes, it was learning music. It became a musician. We become programmed, and when we understand that, and we as adults should look back and recognize, if our parents had no understanding of this, and their programs weren't that good, then by definition, when we're not paying attention 95% of the day, we're probably playing those very same programs.
Yeah, precisely.
And if that program leads to cardiac problems, heart attacks, or it leads to diabetes, we will unconsciously play that program and become diabetic and get a heart attack and then go, it's the genes running in the family. I say, no, it was the programming running in the family. And that's why, Tim, is so important, as you said, when the heck does the programming start? And the answer is, in utero, in the last trimester of pregnancy, the brain is already recording. I say, what do you mean? I go, look, you could play music through the abdominal wall while the fetus is developing. And then when the baby is born, you put that music on, and the baby immediately tune into that music because it knows it.
Yes.
Or the father could talk to the fetus through the abdominal wall, and when that baby is born and the father opens his mouth, the fetus will, now at this point, the baby will know which one the father is just because the memory of the voice in utero. So it's like, yep, we were already recording starting in utero and for the first 7 years. And if your life is not working the way you want it to work, whether it's the cancer or whether it's diabetes, cardiovascular disease, or unhappiness, or, not finding relationships, these are the consequences of behavior. And if your program wasn't good, your struggles in life are not coming because the universe doesn't want to give you something. Yeah. Your struggles in life are coming because you're playing programs that do not support you.
Exactly. And can I say to the audience, if you want to find out more about this, do get a copy of Bruce's first book, The Biology of Belief, particularly the 10th edition that you wrote last year. You go into this in a lot more detail, and there's some great video clips of Bruce talking a lot more about this on his website, brucelipton.com. So check it out. Have a look.
Very important to get up to speed on this. There's another thing, too, in many ways, is the discipline of the mind and having meditation. Because I know that even today in my meditations, I can find myself wavering and all of a sudden my mind goes off course. And so we need to be always just straight up and down. And I'd like you to talk about a disciplined mind, and particularly starting with teenagers at that particular level too, because that's when they really get distracted.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, well, they get distracted then because there's a drive they become self-aware. When a child is below a certain age, it's not self-aware. It's just looking out its eyes and the world is coming in. It doesn't realize their participation until they get to a certain level. But then when they get to that level of participation, all of a sudden they get that, that teenagey kind of thing and says, yeah, but I want to participate differently. And that's where, where all of a sudden kids start doing something out of the ordinary, only because they're just challenging the structure. Yeah. And you know what the interesting part is? They may be just like that as teenagers, but as soon as they get to a certain age, they're going to be just like their parent anyway, because at that point, everything is set. It's 95% of your life. That's it. You are that person. And the whole idea about it is this biology I'm talking about is scientifically the biology of how your thought is creating your internal environment and your external experience. And you go, well, that's interesting. That's a new agey biology. And I go, it is in step with the most valid science on this planet. The most valid science, the science with more truth than any other science on this planet, is quantum physics. There is no science proven to be more truthful. And I go, relevance? Then I just say, the first premise, quantum physics from 1925, is consciousness is creating our life experience.
Yes.
And now biology is stepped in to show the conversion of a conscious thought into chemistry affecting the physical body, and all of a sudden that's called epigenetics. So quantum physics and epigenetics are the new leading edge science, and both of them say exactly the same thing. We are not victims of a biology. We are masters of our genes and our behavior. And if you don't like the way it's working, it's time for driver education.
Yes. Yes, love it, love it. There's two things I need to mention before we wrap it up. There's two other speakers I haven't mentioned that are speaking. One of them is very relevant because New Zealand's just passed a law to legalise medicinal cannabis. And on my sabbatical to the States in July 2016, I met with and sat in the clinic of Dr. Alan Franklin, Santa Monica. This man is an 8-year expert in dosed cannabis medicine. He won't be in person. He'll be on the big screen live from LA talking at the conference about the power of medicinal cannabis in cancer specifically and what it can do. And he's got a big message for New Zealand about taking this big step to legalise this powerful medicine. The other speaker is very well known, probably to your audience, Ty Bollinger, who did the DVD series, The Truth About Cancer. And he's going to be on the big screen as well, live from Nashville, talking about his research. His parents both died of cancer, and he was appalled at the traditional burn cut poison approach and wanted to research valid, bona fide, scientifically proven methods that did cure cancer. And hence he brought out this DVD series, and he's brought out a new series called The Truth About Vaccinations, which we won't go into now, but that opens up a whole can of worms as well. So these are two other speakers that are at the symposium as well. So have a look at the website, holisticcancersymposium.com. holisticcancersymposium.com.
And don't forget, keep 24th and 25th of March free so that you can go there. I think on top of this, we must make sure that we have clean air. And David, your dad was actually involved in the Clean Air Act of New Zealand back.
He helped draft it in 72. Yeah,
that's right. Clean air, pure water, clean, vital water, not sanitized water out of the tap, out through your filter. You've got to go one step clearer than that. And also our food chain. We've got to make sure that, I grow a lot of my food.
Organics is the way to go, for sure.
Definitely. Definitely, because this is the only way we, as energy beings in a greater universal energy field, can orient our way through existence, because at heart, we are all embryo gods.
Absolutely, and that's a great segue to the food we're having at the symposium is all organic. It's put on by Master Chef Peter Chaplin, who catered for our last events, who toured with Madonna for 2 world tours in the 90s. And Madonna, at that point, was a vegetarian-vegan, and she wanted high-protein food because she's an athlete, effectively. And so he prepared very creatively a wide range of foods that were well-absorbed, that met her parameters, that was organic, vegetarian. So we're going to be experiencing his meals directly for the 2 morning teas, the 2 afternoon teas, and the 2 lunches of the event. And for those that enroll for the gala dinner, he's putting on a 4-course meal. There'll be free-range chicken and fish options for the meat eaters, but it'll be mainly a vegetarian menu with delicious food throughout the entire event, so we can eat our way to health and happiness.
So as a baby born into this realm is an energy bundle of exponential potential, how would you like to see the babies of the world express themselves? Bruce, we've got half a minute.
The whole idea is, look, if they came in knowing they were creators, if we gave them the programs that help them become creators rather than limiting their belief system, then we open up full potential. And this is the idea, is that we can still do this even though we are whatever age we're at, the moment we recognize we have been programmed, which we have, and that we can change the program, and that's where empowerment comes from. And you can get out of any disease. You can cause any disease with your belief, but you can get out of any disease with the right belief.
That's empowering. That's very empowering. Yeah.
Okay, loving thoughts.
Well, I want to thank everybody in New Zealand. This is my 10th year. And I tell you, being a refugee from the United States at this moment, that I so appreciate this country, and I also recognize it will be a leader in world changes as we're experiencing right now, because it's a country that's still dependent on community. And our evolution has always been based on the individual, the Darwinian belief, survival of the fittest, the individual. Yeah. When we learn now that the whole belief of Darwin is wrong, it's survival of the community. And there's New Zealand. Thank you.
And it's interesting that Jacinda Ardern has been called the anti-Trump.
Oh, I tell you, that was a magnet that pulls me here.
Right. So regenerative is the way to go. Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, on the 25th of March, here at AUT in Auckland, come and listen to these special human beings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to conclude this extremely important interview of 2 very committed practitioner teachers of the importance of taking care of our body, that some poetically call our temple complex, as it's our body and we are all we have got. So our body needs to be revered as a healthy, holistic vehicle that takes us from our first breath to our last breath, that needs to be honoured as one of the most profound organisms on our planet. When we recognise its complexity and intricacy, as well as its ability to fully recover from some of the unconscious acts meted out, especially during our teenage years, it is imperative that we breathe the most clearest and freshest of air, that our water needs to be the most pure and vital that we can source, and our food wholesome, fresh and organic. These are the grand trine of keeping our body healthy at optimum levels. Yes, we need sunlight too, to enjoy an illuminated life, which is interesting, for the word for sun in Latin is sol, which is the heart of our solar system. Then there is the soul, that is the non-physical component or essence that we are spiritual beings having an earth experience, and this all fits well together with the Green Planet FM premise of environment, health and consciousness. Because when we have a holistic understanding of our bodily composure and live at heart happily and at peace, this is a forerunner towards a conscious, dynamic, heart-centered human who is actually being and doing. I invite you to be able to come to greenplanetfm.com, where we have over 400 interviews in our database, which you can readily download and listen to be able to inspire yourself to become the change you want to see in the world and become involved in caring for your children and grandchildren's future. We are also on Facebook, on Green Planet FM and ourplanet.org. Please come and love us. This is Tim Lynch.
And or Lisa Eyre.
And Liz Gunn.
In the spirit of Aroha, wishing you a wonderful week. We look forward to being with you next week. I say, kia kaha and haere ra.